Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here in the fall garden on this beautiful fall morning. Fall's really just getting started. You can see I have some of my fall lettuces growing back here. And as we kind of move into a new season with the fall garden, I thought it might be a good time to kind of reflect back on the summer garden and just talk about some of the new varieties that I grew in the 2022 gardening season. I'm recording this video in the middle of September. I might wait a little bit before posting this because, you know, usually around like late November, sometime in December, that's when the seed catalogs start coming in, and that's when we really all get excited about planning our next spring garden. And so I was thinking maybe I might post this video around the time those seed catalogs start coming in and maybe give you guys some ideas about some varieties that you might want to consider growing. But I decided to record it now in mid-September while it's still fresh in my mind, so I can make sure that I give you guys the most accurate information possible about how these varieties performed for me this year. Now, I do want to say there's a few varieties on here that I'm going to mention, but I'm not really sure of, and that is because we had kind of a challenging growing season this year here in Connecticut. We had a lot more hot days than usual, and we had very little rain. We went almost this whole summer with no rain. We finally have been getting rain the past few weeks or so. We've actually been getting pretty consistent rain, but we went most of the summer without rain. And in addition to that, I had some unusual pest problems as well. So some of these varieties that didn't perform that well, I'm going to say that it probably wasn't entirely their fault. And so there's some that I'm going to give a second chance to, but we'll talk more about that as we get into the specific varieties. I'm going to be posting another video, which is going to talk kind of about my must-grow list, where I'm going to talk about varieties that I grow consistently every year and that consistently perform well for me. So I will be having kind of a part 2 to this video. This one is focusing specifically on varieties I tried this year for the first time. So the first category that I'm going to talk about is cucumbers. Now, if you've been following along with me this year, you know I had kind of a challenging cucumber year for several reasons. First of all, I generally direct sow my cucumbers. That means I put the seeds directly in the ground rather than starting seeds indoors and transplanting them out. This year, that didn't really have the greatest success because I had some kind of pest in my garden that came through and ate every little cucumber seedling as soon as they came up. So I replanted multiple times throughout the season, and it kept happening every time. Finally, I started some cucumbers in pots on my deck. Those did well, and I transplanted them out. But because of that, we were really late with cucumbers. And by the time they really got in the ground, we were in the midst of that really long heat wave I was telling you guys about, and there wasn't a lot of rain. So because of that, we did end up getting some cucumbers, but I would say it wasn't an amazing cucumber year for us. Because of that, some of the cucumber varieties that I'm mentioning did not perform as well, and I'm going to give those a second chance. But first, I want to talk about one that, even with all the odds stacked against it, this cucumber still did well, and that is the silver slicer cucumber. Now, this is a beautiful white cucumber. We really loved it. It has a really nice sweet flavor. Even when we let it go a little bit too long, it didn't seem to get bitter the way cucumbers often do. Another thing that leads to cucumbers getting bitter is prolonged heat and lack of water. We had all of that this summer, and the silver slicer cucumbers still did really well. We had good production, we had good flavor. So I'm going to say that that is probably going to go on my must-grow list. It's definitely going to go in my 2023 garden. And I'm thinking that that is going to become a must-grow cucumber variety for me in the future. So that's a definite winner that we're going to grow again. Now, there were 2 other cucumber varieties that I tried this year for the first time that did not do that well. I am going to give both of them a second chance because the poor growing conditions that I mentioned, that was not the cucumber's fault. And so I'm going to give them a second chance and see how they do next year. As I mentioned, the silver slicer did well despite those growing conditions. So I can only imagine how well that's going to do next year if I give it a better growing environment. So we're definitely doing that. The other 2 new ones that I tried this year are the China Jade cucumber. Now, that's supposed to be a really long, tender cucumber. It looked beautiful and had amazing reviews. And I have been wanting to find a long variety of cucumber like that to grow. So it was okay. I did get I got some cucumbers. The yield was okay considering the growing conditions. A lot of my cucumbers were kind of misshapen and weird looking. But that being said, I had that same issue with some of my tried and true varieties that I grow every year as well. So I'm going to say that may have been partly environmental stressors. So while the China Jade didn't perform amazingly for me this year, the flavor was good, the yield was okay. I'm going to give it a second chance, and I'm going to say that this was a bad cucumber year to really judge cucumbers on, so I'm going to give that one another chance. Another one that I'm going to give a second chance to, and I hope that I'm pronouncing this correctly, is the Bait Alpha cucumber. This cucumber was not really on my radar to grow, but I got the seed packet as a free seed packet, like kind of a thank you gift, and I think it was in my Baker Creek order. So I decided to give that one a try. It was kind of the same issue as the China Jade. My cucumbers were a little weird shaped, yield was so-so, but again, I'm going to chalk that up to a poor cucumber growing summer. I'm going to give that one another chance. So those are the 3 new cucumbers I tried this year. Silver Slicer's a definite win. The other 2, kind of the jury's still out. I'm going to give them another chance and see how they do next year. So let's move on to the next category, which is beans. I tried 2 new bush bean varieties this year. They both did well, and I'm going to be growing both of them again. One of them is the Red Swan bush bean. These beans were really pretty. They were prolific in the beginning, and they just add a really nice color to your harvest basket. They were a deep kind of purplish pink color. I thought they were really pretty. They yielded well. One thing I will say is they don't hold as long on the plant as some other bean varieties, so you do want to make sure not to wait too long to harvest them, because I found that they did get a little bit tough and stringy if I let them go too long. But as long as you harvest them at the right time, they were tender, they were delicious, they were prolific, as I said. I did run into one issue with them, which is an easily manageable issue, which is that they did not really behave that much like bush beans. They definitely wanted to climb. They didn't climb as much as my pole bean varieties, but they were kind of sprawling into my walkway and kind of outgrowing their space. So I just stuck a couple poles in the garden and they climbed up those and they were fine. But that's just something to be aware of if you're going to grow this kind again. It's a bush bean, but it still has a little bit of a desire to climb. The second bean variety that I tried this year was a yellow bush bean. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of this variety. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you because I think it's French. It's definitely a foreign language that I don't speak, so I'm going to butcher it if I try to pronounce it. But either way, I was happy with these beans as well. They didn't like wow me or amaze me, but they were good. They yielded a reasonable amount. They added a nice color variety as well because they're a nice golden yellow color. So I'll be growing those again next year. I'll grow those probably at least a couple more times and see how they do and decide if they're going to go on my must grow list or not. So those were the new bean varieties that I grew this year. So the next category of new varieties for 2022 that I want to talk about today are pepper plants. Now I tried several new pepper varieties. I had mixed levels of success with them. And again, peppers were another plant that did not do all that well for me this year. A lot of that was because of poor planning on my part. If you watched my garden fails video, you saw more detail about this. But basically, when I set up my new tomato trellises, I didn't really take into account the angle of the sun when I planned where my tomato plants and my pepper plants were going to go. And so a lot of my pepper plants ended up with a lot more shade and a lot less sun than they would have really liked. So my peppers were not all that successful this year. I am definitely going to be switching things around a little bit to remedy that next year and hopefully have a much more successful pepper year. Now, despite that, I had one new pepper variety that I tried that actually thrived and did amazingly well despite the poor growing conditions. That was the shishito pepper. I will definitely be growing this one again, and I anticipate that that will probably be growing on my must grow list for all future years. So the shishito pepper was a delicious pepper. It yielded really well despite the poor growing conditions. It just really overcame that adversity and thrived. So that one's a definite winner. Now there's two more pepper varieties that I tried this year for the first time, which did not do all that well, but I was really excited to try both of them, and I'm going to give both of them another chance because I'm going to say if I give them better growing conditions, I imagine they will do better. One of those was the habanada pepper. Now that pepper, it's basically a habanero pepper with no heat. And people describe it and say that it has a really good fruity flavor, and I really want to try that pepper. So I'm going to give that one another chance next year, and I'm hoping that if I give it better growing conditions, if I give it more sun, I'm going to try growing some in pots on my deck as well. I'm hoping if I do that, I will have better success with it. The other pepper, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, this was a new pepper this year that I think Baker Creek introduced it. I had never heard of it before anyway. I'm not sure if anyone else carries it or not, but that was the Lesia pepper. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, so I am going to put the name of this on the screen so that you can see, so that you can go ahead and look that pepper up. I was really excited about that pepper. It sounded so good. It did not do well for me, but again, I don't think I can really blame the pepper plant for that because of the poor growing conditions it had. I don't think I didn't harvest any peppers from those plants, but again, I can't blame the plants. So that is one that I will be giving another chance to. I'm going to be trying that again, and hopefully I'll have a different report for you about that pepper next year. Now the next category of new 22 varieties that I want to talk to you guys about is tomatoes. I posted a video, I want to say a couple weeks ago, but I'm not actually sure. By the time you see this video, I'm not sure how long ago it's going to be. Back in early September, I posted a video reviewing the tomato varieties that I grew in 2022. Now that wasn't exclusively focusing on new varieties. That was kind of all the varieties that I grew. Some of them are tried and true, some of them were new. So I went into a little more detail in that video. I'm going to go ahead and link that video below so that you can find it if you want more information about these tomato varieties. But for this video, I'm just going to mention the new ones I tried in 2022 and talk a little bit about how those did. So the first tomato that I tried this year for the first time was the Dr. Weish's. It's a big orangish yellow slicer tomato. That one I was happy with. I will be growing it again. It yielded probably a medium amount for me. It didn't yield a lot of tomatoes, but the tomatoes were delicious, and it adds a nice variety to your tomato harvest basket. It's a nice golden orange color. I was happy with those tomatoes, so I'll be growing those again next year. The next tomato variety that I tried this year for the first time was the Climbing Triple Crop. I was very impressed with this tomato. It yielded well, it had big meaty tomatoes, the flavor was delicious. The plant stayed reasonably healthy. I did deal with some tomato disease this year, as I do most years. But the plants did well. They outperformed a lot of my other tomato varieties. So that one is going to definitely go in my 2023 garden as well. Now the next tomato variety that I tried this year for the first time was the Horizon tomato. Those are kind of medium-sized tomatoes, bigger than a cherry tomato, smaller than a big slicer, sort of like a small slicer tomato. I was impressed with the yield and the flavor and the general disease resistance. All of my tomatoes eventually did get disease. So when I say that a tomato was disease resistant in my garden, that means that it performed well compared to other tomato varieties that were in my garden. So it seemed like that one did really well, so I'll be growing that one again next year. Now another tomato that I'm not sure if I'm going to grow again or not, I tried this one for the first time this year, was the black strawberry tomato. This tomato did well. The tomatoes were beautiful, which is the main reason why I would consider growing it again. The flavor was just so-so. It didn't really wow me. This is one that I can say, now I know some of my cucumbers and peppers I mentioned I've got to give them another chance because it wasn't a great growing season. The black strawberry, I will say it did well. So I really got a good idea of what the plant is like, but I wasn't just a big fan of the flavor. And so I'm not sure if I'll grow that one again. If I do grow it again, it will probably only be one plant and just for the beauty of it. Now it tasted fine. It didn't taste bad. It was better than a grocery store tomato would have been, but I just have so many other cherry tomatoes that I really love the flavor of that I don't want to devote a lot of space to a tomato that only tastes okay. So that was kind of my thoughts on that one. I may give it one more year and see how it does, but it didn't really wow me. Now the next tomato variety that I tried this year that I will probably not grow again is the Abe Lincoln tomato. Now, I was kind of conflicted about this because I've heard so many amazing reviews of this tomato. So many people love it and say the flavor is amazing that I feel like I should give it another chance. But it really didn't do well for me. It got pretty much every tomato on the plant got blossom end rot. And while it was a good year for tomatoes to develop blossom end rot, the conditions weren't amazing. I had lots of other tomatoes that didn't struggle with that at all. So I will say compared to my other tomatoes, it didn't do that well. So I'm not sure. I might give it one more chance, but I'm not really sold on the Abe Lincoln. I think I might really instead focus more on increasing the number of the Climbing Triple Crops that I grew because that tomato did wow me. It had great flavor. It way outperformed the Abe Lincoln. So I'm thinking I'm going to increase the number of Climbing Triple Crops to kind of fill that red tomato spot that I need filled. Now another tomato that I will probably not grow again that I tried this year for the first time was the Black Opal cherry tomato. These tomatoes were fine, they were okay, but the thing is that it's very similar to the black cherry tomato, and we prefer the black cherry. I don't think there's a need to grow both, and black cherry is what we like better, so we're just going to grow that one instead. Now the Black Opal, it performed fine in my garden. We got a decent yield from it. The flavor was fine, but it just wasn't as good as black cherry, so I think I will be discontinuing Black Opal and just increasing the number of black cherries that I grow instead. The final tomato variety that I want to mention for this video is the Sun Gold Select. You've heard me talk about this tomato before. It's an open pollinated version of Sun Gold. Now, I really liked it. It basically tasted the same as Sun Gold to me. If you're not interested in saving seeds, I don't think you really need both. I don't think you really need Sun Gold and Sun Gold Select because they're so similar. I am thinking of playing around with saving seeds, so I will grow Sun Gold Select again next year. I will probably also grow the original Sun Gold just so I can give them a little more time of side-by-side comparison. So that one I will grow again next year. I was happy with it. Now also for the first time in my 2022 garden, I tried a couple new basil plants, and I was happy with all of the new basils that I tried. So I will be adding them to my basil rotation. Or when I say basil rotate, I'm not really sure why I said rotation. I'll be adding them to my basil lineup. Because I do not rotate basil varieties, I just add to my basil varieties, and I kind of think that you can't really have too much basil. It's a very tough thing to do. You can always find ways to use it, and if you have more than you need, then you can preserve it. So I'm just going to grow as much basil as I can fit. So a couple new varieties that I grew this year. I grew the mammoth lettuce leaf basil for the first time. This is a basil with huge leaves, and I was happy with this one. I will say, again, I struggled with basil in my garden this year. You know, this is my first year making YouTube videos, and I gotta say, it was like trial by fire because this was a challenging growing season for me. And of course, you know, I'm doing this now in front of however many people are watching my videos. And I don't know. I was like, could have done this last year when my garden did so much better. But either way, so you guys are seeing my gardening life as it really is. Anyway, so back to basil. So the lettuce leaf basil, it was a tough year for me for in-ground garden basil. Actually, my basil is actually doing pretty well now in mid-September. It struggled a lot through the summer, but it's really picking up now. But I did have basil on my deck in pots that did well the whole year through. So we enjoyed the lettuce leaf basil from that. I also grew spicy bush basil this year for the first time. That has definitely a distinctly different flavor from a lot of other basils. It has smaller leaves. It's definitely different, and we enjoyed it. So I'm going to grow that one again next year as well. Spicy bush basil is going on my 2023 garden grow list. So that one was a success as well. Another type of basil that we tried for the first time this year was purple ball basil, and I was happy with that one as well. I had a plant on my deck that grew and got really big and just yielded so much. It's a beautiful purple color. Now, in the past, I've grown purple opal basil. I actually did grow that this year. But I will say it's not as purpley as, you know, the seed company pictures kind of lead you to believe. It's like a purple greenish basil. It's got purple tones to it, but a lot of times it's not really that deep purple that the pictures show. The purple ball basil was a lot purpler in my opinion. So I will definitely be growing that one again next year. It's kind of a fun novelty variety just for that little bit of purple. It's got a little bit of a different flavor. So I'll be growing that one just for fun. Now I also tried 2 new varieties of broccoli this year. My normal go-to broccoli variety was sold out from every seed company this year. I think there must have been a crop failure or something. The farmer that grows it must have not had a very successful year. So because of that, I could not find seeds for my tried and true variety. So I tried a few different new varieties this year. I tried Eastern Magic and I tried Solstice broccoli. I planted both of those in the spring. Eastern Magic did very well. So I don't know if it did as well as my tried and true, which is Arcadia, by the way. That's my favorite broccoli variety. But it performed really well, and so I think in the future I'll be growing a mix of Eastern Magic and Arcadia. I like to grow a few different varieties because they have different maturity dates. That way you're not getting all of your broccoli harvested all at once, and it's kind of staggered a little bit more. So because of that, I like to grow multiple varieties. So I will be growing the Eastern Magic again. Now, Solstice did not do all that well for me. It kind of bolted and yielded very early, very small heads. And the flavor wasn't as good either. The flavor was fine, it was decent. But that one was listed as doing better in the fall. So I think that what I'm going to do is try that one again next fall. I'm going to skip it in the spring. I'll just do a mix of Arcadia, if I can get the seeds, mixed with Eastern Magic. And if I'm able to get some broccoli planted for the fall, I'm going to try some Solstice in the fall as well. So I think that I really need to give that one another chance because, as I said, it's supposed to be a fall variety. I grew it in the spring, so I wasn't really being fair to it. But I was not really happy with it as a spring variety. So I had a few other new varieties that I grew this year for the first time. One of them was the Spring Blush Snap Pea. That was beautiful. It did well. It performed well. The peas were beautiful. I don't think I'm going to grow it again, though, because the flavor just wasn't as good as our tried and true favorite, Super Sugar Snap. Now, we love Super Sugar Snap. We love the original Sugar Snap. They're both really good. And I think that while the Spring Blush was really fun for variety and was really pretty, it had gorgeous purple flowers. So it was definitely an ornamental plant. We just found that all of us preferred the Super Sugar Snap instead of that. So even though I'm glad I tried it, it was fun, I don't think I'll be growing it again. I think I'll just be using that space to grow more Super Sugar Snap peas instead. So another plant that I was kind of unsure of that we tried this year for the first time was the pineapple ground cherry. Now, I tried to plant some of these plants in my house. I couldn't get them to germinate. I know everyone says that it takes a really long time for them to germinate, and I gave them at least a month and they never germinated. So I ended up just sprinkling a few seeds outside. From that, I did get some germination. So I had a handful of ground cherry plants that came up. So I ate some of the ground cherries. They tasted fine. They weren't amazing, and I kind of think that's how the rest of my family felt too. They were okay, but probably not really worth giving garden space to. So what I'm going to do is, if any volunteer ground cherries come up next year, I have heard that this is a plant that tends to self-sow really easily, and we may get some volunteer plants come up. If that is the case, I'll let those volunteers grow and we'll harvest what we get from them, but I'm not going to intentionally plant more next year, so we'll just kind of see what happens. Now, I know a lot of people really love ground cherries and make them into jam and say they're delicious that way. We didn't have enough to make into jam, so if I get a lot of volunteers next year and we have enough, I probably will try making some jam and see how we like that. Now, the final plant that I want to mention this year that I tried for the first time, which it didn't do all that well for me, but again, I'm going to say that that might be partly the result of poor growing conditions, was the Kajari melon. Now, I planted these melons kind of along with my cucumbers, and so they had the same saga that my cucumbers lived through this year, where something kept eating the seedlings as soon as they popped up, and so they got off to a very late start, and then after that, they were immediately subjected to a really long heat wave. Normally in Connecticut, we get days in the 90s, but we don't usually get like weeks and weeks and weeks on end in the 90s, which we did get this year, combined with no rain for basically the whole summer. So I did water my garden, but I didn't water it as much as it really needed. So my Kajari melons didn't really do well. So I think I'm going to give those another chance next year. I'm going to hopefully have better success next year, and then we'll actually be able to judge whether we really like that variety or not. So I hope this gives you guys some ideas of plants that you might be considering growing in your garden next year. And keep in mind that growing in different areas, you're going to have different struggles and different successes. You're likely to have success with different plants than I did. I mentioned, for example, the Abe Lincoln really didn't do well in my garden, but lots of people talk about that tomato and say it's amazing. So I'm going to say that might be kind of a regional thing. If you've tried any of these plants that I've mentioned, whether it was plants that were successful or not successful, let me know how they did for you. I would love to hear how these plants performed in different growing conditions and different areas of the country. And as I said, I'll be making another video fairly soon talking about kind of my favorite must-grow varieties, and that's not going to just be limited to new varieties that I grew this year. That will be kind of varieties that have stood the test of time and that I recommend growing every year. If you have any new varieties you want to suggest to me for my 2023 garden, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, because I would love to get some new varieties to try. So I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope that you had a great 2022 gardening year, and I hope even more importantly that you're looking forward to an even better gardening year in 2023. I know I am. I know I am trying to learn from my mistakes of 2022 and improve my garden season for 2023. So I hope to see you guys again soon. All right, I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye guys, I'll see you next time.